process. Since I am so process oriented, it's helpful for me to go page by page and through the plan itself to see if there's any overall questions or comments. But let me start with that PowerPoint. So as you know, this is your strategic plan logo, and the tagline for the strategic plan is charting a course for Madison's future. And I just wanted to say thank you to everybody first, because this is not a plan that's sort of done in an office in a remote setting by a bunch of people with, hats and pens. This is a plan that you, as part of the community, created over the course of, as Peggy mentioned, over the course of many, many months. And I wanted to remind everybody what a strategic plan actually is. It's not a master plan. It's not super specific, and it doesn't have any drawings in it, and it does not have extreme detail, because it's intended to be big picture, policy level, sort of a guidance, so that the community who helped create this plan, and then the Board of Selectmen, who hopefully will approve the plan at some point, either tonight or soon, can say, this is where we're headed. This is what we see happening in the future. And it allows the Board of Selectmen to give better guidance and direction to the budget, to creating other master plans, to communicating with you all as a member of the public about what might be most important. And the key to making this all work is that it should be a living document. It shouldn't just be shelved somewhere. It should be used. And this is a plan really for the town government, for the organization of the town, as opposed to, say, a community plan like your plan of conservation and development, the POCD, as it's known, which is referenced, and the documents should integrate and talk to each other, but they're two very different documents. So having said that, when we do strategic planning, we try to answer four main questions. And if you're with us, you recognize these in some form or another. The first one is, where are we right now? What is it we want to preserve? What's really great that no matter what else happens 50 years from now, we still want this to happen, or we still want to see this in our community? And then there is that 50 years from now question. What do we want to be like? Where do we want to go? What's that final sort of destination and vision for the future? And then, of course, there's the heart and soul of the work, which is, how are we going to get from where we are today to where we want to be? Exactly what has to happen to make those things change and to see that eventual reality. And then there's always the important question of, how will we know? If you have measurements and outcomes, which we created as part of the plan in terms of what are these outcomes we want to try to drive and achieve, that's how we'll know if we're successful, if we're actively doing that. But coming full circle back to living document, if it's not a living document, things change. And so you want to stay on top of the plan that way. Lots of benefits to strategic planning. I'm going to skip those for now, but I do want to say the process had 5 phases. This is the very tail end of phase 5, which is the document creation. And once we get this all sort of wrapped up, this document will be hopefully adopted by the Board of Selectmen. And then we get into the implementation space for the town to start actually doing the work necessary to accomplish what's in the plan. So way back, she mentioned May, it was actually way back in April. I know we all try to forget how long we've been doing this. So literally close to 6 months now, we have been working on all of these phases. A large part of this was the community input. That's what took us a bulk of time in the spring, summer, and early fall. We had surveys, we did interviews. A lot of you came to those focus groups and the community visioning session that we did. We did a lot of engagement over the summertime. We also wanted people to take a break and enjoy the beautiful summer there. And then we held a retreat, and we held a series of meetings with staff to say, all right, now that we have a general idea of what this policy level direction is, what are some things that we might be able to add to that conversation as professional staff members? What are we doing right now that people might not know about? And how does that fit in? And all of that ended up in the document that you've been looking at for a few months now. So the idea was that we took all the information that the community gave us over that course of time, talked about it in a series of meetings, and there have been multiple meetings since then, of course. You had a strategic plan advisory council that was instrumental in helping guide the conversation and what went into the plan. And we've had several public meetings as well to talk about the content of the plan. At the end of the day, what will happen over the course of the coming years is that this strategic plan will drive your budget. So what I want to do now is sort of stop share with this and see if there's anybody on the board or with the SPAC that would like to talk anything more about the process before I hit maybe a few of the high points of the plan itself and then dive into the document if we need to do that. Anything to add about the process? Yes, please.
I think it's just important to note that we had probably 80 people at the senior center, I think, for the community visioning session. That was in June. We had 3 focus groups that week that were all very well attended, probably 30 people in each of those focus groups, maybe that's around that. I think we had, 700 people respond to the survey. And then the strategic plan advisory committee met monthly throughout the summer and also participated in the retreat. The retreat was attended by members of the Board of Selectmen, members of the strategic planning committee, some of the senior staff, and other kind of leadership, people in leadership positions throughout the town. So there's been a lot of different people, involved in this over time. And we did spend a lot of time wordsmithing things, and I'm sure there's some words in here that people will say, oh, I don't like this word, I don't like that word. A lot of them were agonized, especially the mission and values, and those are tough things to craft, but there was a lot of thought that went into a lot that's in here, and compromise, I will say. When people have different points of view, and we try to come together with a word or phrase that we felt was a fair compromise. I think Cheryl often uses the 80% rule, right? So good enough, but we're not looking for perfection here. So that was kind of the approach to this document. The other thing that I just want to highlight is there is a whole implementation piece that is a layer below this. And that was one of the key things we really wanted out of this. We just didn't want mission and values sitting on the shelf, high level stuff. We wanted implementation. And so that next layer down is what the staff has been working on, trying to take each of these things and put it into action items. And this board, going forward, will probably on a quarterly basis be looking at that implementation plan and measuring how we're going about with clear target goals and everything for what's in the implementation plan. So that's not part of this. This is kind of like the bird, I don't want to say bird's eye view, but the higher, bigger strategic view. And then there's more of a detailed substantive deliverance plan. So those are my comments. I don't know. I know a number of people here, we all participated in different parts of this. So
perfect summary.
So with that,
well, maybe I should touch a bit on just the highlights of the plan. As Peggy mentioned, the plan has a lot of detail in it, but when it comes right down to it, you can find the best idea of what the community gave feedback on and what was, as Peggy mentioned, worked on for months and months in terms of language in about 4 key areas. So let me just cover that with you really quickly. The vision and mission, we touched base on that really quickly, but the vision is this, it might exist right now, but for the most part, it's this perfect image of the future. So the vision statement says, the town of Madison is a friendly and thriving shoreline community with small town values, a celebrated history, natural beauty, and a high quality of life. And let me suggest that at a meeting like this, we do not want a wordsmith. As Peggy mentioned, this has been wordsmith to death. Instead, some of the questions I might ask you are, is there anything in the plan that's confusing that we could explain? Because almost all of us in the room and outside of the room on Zoom, we're in these series of meetings. Is there anything that we just missed where you're like, hey, I think this should be in the plan and I see no reference to it whatsoever? Those are the types of things that I'd really like you to think about. So then comes the mission statement. This is the purpose of the town. Why does the town exist? It's not particularly inspiring, but it should be very obvious. And it says, our mission is to ensure an attractive, sustainable, safe, healthy, and welcoming environment with premier schools, abundant natural and cultural resources, a responsive government, and high quality public schools. And I just noticed something, Peggy. This is slightly miswritten because we mentioned schools twice. Believe me, schools were important. So you'll see the actual in the document, and I'll refer back to this in a minute.
Public services versus public schools is the document.
That was it. Okay. There were some values in the plan. These are important because this is how the town will conduct its work. And sometimes you'll see values also stated as goals. So you see words like sustainable in some of our focus areas and some of our goals. You'll also see some words show up multiple times like inclusive. And so they become important values about how the town conducts their business. So priorities and outcomes, I mentioned this briefly. Priorities, in this case, we've called them key areas of focus. And then we defined outcomes for each key area of focus. Again, this is this bigger picture, high level. What is it that we want to see that's different? What are we going to achieve 10, 15, 20 years from now that might not exist today because we've chosen these key focus areas? And then we also go down to the level of goals in the plan that you'll see. So your priorities, we call them key focus areas, are financial and environmental sustainability, high-performing government, modern and innovative infrastructure, safe and healthy community, and a thriving business and economy. And if you wanted to know what they meant, the definitions are in the plan. And if you wanted to see the outcomes are also in the plan. And I do see a couple of questions coming through on chat, and we'll definitely get to those. So then I mentioned the goals and the objectives. Each priority, each key focus area will have multiple goals and SMART objectives underneath that goal. And if you're familiar with SMART objective, it's an acronym that makes that piece of objective very specific, measurable, it's actionable, it's realistic, it has a time frame to it. And then when you get to the level of action steps, Peggy mentioned this, there's an implementation plan that will continue to be the working document. And it's not something that I ask the board to adopt because it changes, like literally daily and weekly, that document changes because those action steps are being achieved. They're shorter term, they're very focused. They're how am I going to achieve this objective? And is that objective the right objective to achieve that goal, which is what my board and my community has indicated is important. So if you've done strategic planning before, this is all very, very familiar language to you. And there wasn't anything, there shouldn't be anything that's particularly sort of confusing about that language if you've seen it before. But I do know a lot of people haven't worked with strategic plans. And so I'm happy to answer any questions about what any of this means. And one of the questions that came through in the chat goes back to how we created the plan. So we, as a consultant firm, we work nationally. And so we are familiar with best practices. There are multiple agencies like the ICMA and CCMA and multiple agencies that are national that deal with things like best practices across communities, that deal with best practices for your size of community, that deal with some issues specific to the state and the region that could be brought into focus through the strategic plan. So yes, there was time spent, but what I've found is that it's best to create a strategic plan that's unique to Madison, that recognizes that there are best practices out there, i.e. the high-performing government conversation and the conversation in the plan around climate change and how do we address that as a shoreline community. But the plan is really unique to Madison. It's not a cookie cutter plan based on best practices from another agency. So in terms of the question was stealing, no, I don't have any good examples of stealing because everything we did was unique to Madison with those best practices in mind. Oh, this other agency does something like this, perhaps we can look at it. And that's also something that the staff should be doing in the implementation piece, because that's not necessarily big picture policy level. So that'll be something that the staff continues to work on during the implementation phase. And there was one more, oh, now there are a couple more chats coming in, but I know that Peggy, you may want me to go through the plan next as well.
Yeah, I think if we could do that, we just allotted an hour today, so, but I mean, like I said, this is gonna be an evolving process, so I think if we could maybe spend 5 or 10 minutes going through the document, and then we could leave the rest for public comment.
Perfect.
We'll do it that way.
Yep. I will, as I laughingly call it, speed date you. I just want to show you the document, and indeed, it might even take less than 5 minutes. It's about 30 pages long, and it helps tell the story. So it's not just a static document. It's intended to be engaging, and it's intended to be something that people would want to read and want to look at. All the photos are unique to Madison. And again, this language is all crafted, and it's unique to what Madison, the trends, the challenges, the obstacles, the barriers, the opportunities, what the community told us, as well as what the Board of Selectmen feel is most important. So as part of this process, you'll see a letter and some acknowledgements, and we truly mean it. And I know the board truly means it as well. Thank you to the people who participated. And this is an ongoing process that will allow continuous participation as well. So if strategic planning is your thing, stay tuned, because as Peggy mentioned, those quarterly updates are forthcoming. We talk a little bit about the history and a lot about the demographics. We've already seen a typo. Thank you to the individual who sent in the typo. So we will be correcting acres to miles of trails and confirming that actual number, which we get from, informed sources, as it were. We get that directly from other documents or the staff. So those infographics then go into this conversation around the government. One of the things that we found during our conversation with the community is it wasn't well understood how the government operates and how the town has all of these appointed boards and commissions. So you'll recognize this is a new layout for how the town, the flow chart of the town. It's the same exact flow chart, it's just a different layout. So it's easier to read. Thanks to Rita for that. Your history is important. We wanted to recognize it. We also wanted to talk about the process that I just went through, listing all of the people who participated. Now, if you're interested in the results of the engagement and outreach, we have everything you might possibly want, and it's also somewhat part of this plan, and I want to point that out in a minute. This is the framework. Just that if you wanted a one-pager, this is your one-pager, and then it goes into details. I mentioned the descriptions. I mentioned the outcomes. Here are the goals and objectives in priority order based on direction from the board at 2 meetings, but certainly the most recent meeting in October helped with this. So each of these key focus areas has its own page and goes into detail. Then we talk about the things that we have to keep in mind to be successful, like technology and continuing community input, being flexible and adaptable. Then the plan talks about your unique advantages and challenges, because this is important to keep in mind as you go through this entire process. When someone comes by and says, hey, what about this? We may know already that that might be one of our advantages we can jump on, or it might be a challenge we have to work our way through. Then we talk about the fact that it's a living document and there's a cycle. And we also talk about how you can use the document to help inform the budget process, and also how you can use the document to say, I'm sorry, that just doesn't align with what we're trying to accomplish. And then I mentioned all of these definitions here, but also this is sort of the summary of the engagement and outreach results in just a few pages. We have multiple reports if you ever wanted to read them all. And then there's your back page. So that's the entire strategic plan document. There is that separate implementation plan that the staff will be working on over the course of time as well. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can, or I'll just stand by and put myself on mute for a while.
So I guess if the board will just take questions from the public. Okay. And then, and we say questions for the public and
And
then,
there's questions, I think, already online.
yeah, I'm thinking let's start in the room and then switch to online. So if you would like to raise your hand and, give your address, please, for the record and.
Name and address.
Should I stand up?
Yeah, it's probably better because the people are home that way. So, yes.
My name's Wendy Schoen. I'm at 194 Bartlett Drive. I have a question about the modern and innovative infrastructure. Under strategic goals and smart objectives. Goal 2. No, goal 2, objective 2.1, attract new cellular service companies to encourage competition and excellent service. I'm wondering if it was intentional that you limited it to cellular service and not broader telecommunications, which would include, other kinds of companies besides cell companies.
So these are supposed to be more specific, and so build reliable utility connectivity through network and infrastructure. The overall goal is kind of covering a lot of different things. I think in here, the discussion was, we've had a lot of public feedback about cell service or self-service up north as well as down like in beach areas as well.
The dead zone. and
Yeah,
79.
so this was trying to drill down very specific, let's talk about cell service. We actually have our board and the town has been looking at different ways to do that already. So the idea is then have some implementation action items underneath that. Are you looking at more than, when you say other?
I'm thinking of internet service.
Internet
Like
service,
we're really
yeah.
limited in our choices.
In terms
I know
of
it's a big
broadband
concern
and-
to a lot of people. I know we discussed it at the
Yeah.
focus group that I went to. And
Yeah.
it doesn't really seem to have a place here if you limit the cellular, but if you
Yeah.
change the cellular service to telecommunications, then that
Right.
would encompass more.
Okay. Good
I
point.
like
Yeah.
it.
Okay. All right, yes.
Hi, Dean Plummer, 84 Farmbrook Circle. I just had two quick observations, questions. One was, is there another document that discusses risks faced by Madison over the planning timeframe that this anticipates? Something that would talk about rising costs, something talking about current problems, something talking about anticipated risks, increasing complexity of leadership. It's something that describes risk as you are seeing it. And it might be a reason for doing a strategic plan like this to address risks and problems. And the second question I had was, there doesn't seem to be a discussion about regional sharing of resources and services. And in the face of rising costs and increasing complexity and the need to do things at scale, it seemed like it was missing somehow.
Yeah.
And we've got some examples, but are they going to be grown or shrank? Or, what's the thinking about sharing resources with our neighbors?
So on the risk side, I mean, we talk about challenges in the document. I think a lot of this came out of, these goals came out of acknowledging the risks, I guess. We got a lot of feedback about all the risks, but we didn't categorize them necessarily as risks. You understand what I'm saying?
If there's a
Like some
list
of
of them, that would be
Yeah.
great.
That's a fair point, because I think it was all part of the discussion of how we came up with all the problems that we need to tackle and what our key strategic areas of focus are. So, and I know we have the challenges piece, which is kind of light, we could expand on the challenge. But we
Well,
can
they're a little
expand,
rosy, the challenges.
Yeah. well, I mean, I think a lot of the, but, so I think we could incorporate like a deeper dive on the risk thing. As I said, it was kind of integrated as part of how we came up with the, our key focus areas. So, but
The
I think
risk
it's a
of
fair
putting
point.
risks is
Yeah.
its point in time too, so,
Well, it might be anticipated,
but that's okay.
Right.
because it's a
Right.
planning document.
Yeah.
So I can get a pen that works. An extra? You have an extra? Okay. But yeah, I think that's a fair point, to actually identify those specific risks. I mean, typically SWOT analysis, right? We just kind of did a broad, and I don't know, Cheryl, if you have any specific thoughts on that, but just trying to take a deeper dive on actually listing out risks. Kind of a broader SWOT analysis.
Yes, my recommendation for that is almost always that the broader community, of course, define these what we loosely call advantages and challenges. When it gets into the implementation piece, then the subject matter experts, i.e., your professional staff, start talking about the risk assessment and what's currently being done and what might need to be done, and then brings the recommendation back through the process to the Board of Selectmen. I found that the community is great at identifying what they see as the trends and opportunities and challenges. But then when it comes down to the who's going to do the work, the staff typically is best at doing the risk assessment process. So that's typically where I would recommend that the responsibility lies. But you could certainly do a more classic risk analysis and risk assessment. Both broad and hyper specific to specific areas as well.
Yeah, and maybe what we do is flush out basically the challenges, a deeper dive on that, make it more sensitive that, and you'll see a lot of those will be covered in some of our goals, right, over the next 10 years to tackle. And then the other point you made on, sorry, what was the second point on?
Regional sharing.
Yeah,
of
shared service.
resources
That's a
and
good point. We've talked a lot about it, but didn't actually get put in here. We've got a lot of different things that we're doing.
services.
Yeah, we're doing it now and we continue to do, we have certain areas that we're targeting for that, but that's a good point. I think that's something that it came up a lot, but part of this is you have to kind of consolidate and prioritize, but it should be addressed in some way, I think, in the
That's great,
document.
great
It's
comment.
not really in here, so it's a good comment, so. Um,
All comments are good.
yeah, and that's the whole point of this. So this is not, it's a draft. So we're trying to make this as inclusive and comprehensive as possible. So, yeah.
Hi, Jim Nordgren.
Yeah.
387 Boston Post Road, just following on this gentleman's question about risks. I don't see a mention of the population projections in the recently completed affordable housing plan. Mentions that Madison's population has been declining for the past 8 years. And it says, despite a bump from COVID, it's projected to decline for another 2 decades. So I'm wondering how the strategic plan contemplates dealing with that. And I see a contradiction really with lines saying neighborhood business districts should be expanded throughout the community. And I also see a contradiction with the declining population with the objective on page 19 to develop a balanced distribution of business districts throughout the town. So it seems to me if the risk is, well, maybe it's not a risk, of a declining population, we really have to figure out how the town's going to respond to a declining population. And if this strategic plan is talking about expanding businesses throughout the community, well, I'm not sure if, I didn't hear that. I heard more about preserving historic character and culture and small town feel, the focus group I went to. But if you're planning on expanding businesses throughout the community with the declining population, doesn't that just lead to more like for lease signs that I see up and down the roads in all these towns? So that's my question. How do you face a new reality of a declining population?
So one of the things we heard loud and clear from the public is they want to see a diverse population in terms of age. They want to have young families. I'm forgetting the word right now that would be called, but in terms of having multi-generational, that's the word, right? So we heard that a lot. Like, we need to continue to be multi-generational, and how do we attract that? Because one of the population issues is the aging of the population, right, in town. So I think that was kind of woven throughout a lot of the conversations here. The business discussion was really more about North versus South, I think, is what I recall. People feeling there isn't a lot of economic development support for North Madison. There's not as much commercial opportunities in North Madison. So that was the big kind of conversation, I think, so that not everything's just concentrated in downtown. And then I think the idea of business is we're trying to change that concept. So it's not just your traditional brick and mortar concept of business. We talked about tourism, agritourism, our farms as being part, those are businesses, right? Those are things that attract, people to Madison. So looking at, I think economic development a little bit differently, and then also trying to have it be more throughout the entire community and not this traditional brick and mortar Main Street concept. So that was what I recall in the conversations in the retreat, and at the board level. But if you want to weigh in on your thinking on that.
Yeah, no, I agree. It was the distribution, meaning like the bookends of town, so to speak, like the far east and west ends of Route 1, and then also up into more of the North Madison area, like around the circle where the Robert Shopping Center is. In terms of distribution of businesses, that's what it felt like the feedback was during our sessions.
Shouldn't the plan state that?
I don't understand.
Well, that would be like the next, level down in terms of, what would be the implementation plan and, developing a, some sort of economic development plan for North Madison. That could be one thing that we could talk to EDC about. So there's a whole layer after that. But that was generally what the discussion was.
The way you describe it makes
Yeah.
sense. Robert Shopping Plaza and the Village Center, the way you just described business development, but the way it reads twice is throughout town. And again, that's kind of the opposite of what I got the sense of what people wanted in town. I mean, business opportunities throughout town could also be sprawl.
I think, once again, though, this is a broader concept, so that we have a lot more home-based businesses now. We have a lot of people that work from home and farms. So I'm just saying, it was trying to be more comprehensive of what we see now in town. It's not about just brick and mortar buildings. It's about home-based businesses, agritourism, that type of stuff. So it's not like we're gonna build, this isn't a commercial development zoning discussion. It's more like we want to be supportive of all kinds of businesses throughout town.
I think if you could clarify it, that might
Okay. Yep.
allay some fears.
No,
Let's
it's
give Mr. Katz there, he's had it, he's been patient.
Thank you. I'm like the child that the teacher won't call on.
You're hidden.
What's your name and your address? 'Cause I
Yes,
don't know.
Alan Katz and 363 Boston Post Road. It's the corner of Stony Lane. And there is a question I have after I just say, read something. And I think it's a question that addresses a broad base situation, what you're talking about tonight, Peggy. But at 11 o'clock on February 17th, the town's P&Z board passed a PDD overlay on a large section of residential land in our town that has been that way for 200 years. And that went from Mungertown to Stony Lane, from the Post Road to Fort Path. And it allowed now PDD applications to be made, commercial development to ensue. It was passed at 11 o'clock at night. Most of the residents that live in that zone were totally unaware of the large change that has been made to their property. We opposed it at the meeting. No one, to my knowledge, spoke in favor of it, yet P&Z passed it at 11 o'clock at night. And we are now going through trying to modify that with an amendment that's going to be voted on this Thursday night to save the Post Road and to allow, and we met with you, Peggy, we went and met with Aaron Mannix for 2.5 hours. And we're not sure how this is going to be voted upon, but everyone seemed that the text amendment change was the proper way to go about, I'm going to say the word, an error that was made to allow these PDDs applications to be made. So my question at the end of the statement is, should not these crucial decisions, which is in objective 1.1, modify zoning and regulations to allow, and shouldn't these be set to public referendums? should the citizens of this town have a right to know that their property designation is going from an R1 to basically a commercial zone overnight without them really being aware of it? And possibly, in my opinion, changing the value of their homes, and for sure, the postcard entrance in this particular PDD, the postcard entrance to our town that we are known for. But right now, the P and Z board has made that section of the post road and everything within it susceptible to PDD commercial applications. So I think this is very crucial to what seems to be a very active strategic plan and an envisionment for a changing Madison going forward, that the citizens need to be heard. And these crucial matters should not be voted upon at 11 o'clock at night by 5 people, 2 or 3 of which are totally new to the board and inexperienced, directed by a town planner to say, don't worry, we got it, we're in control. And I don't think they are. So that's the question. Why should not these be put to public referendums?
So, well, tonight, we're just talking about the strategic plan, right? And I understand, I hear that, you know, people are reading into some of these things, I think, at a deeper level than the intention was. So I think that helps us to get feedback. And make sure that, you know, the other thing you have to read in the strategic plan, though, is also preserving our small town, preserving our history. So those are all part of it too. So anything that we were going to develop from, and when I say zoning, if they're going to be making zoning changes, they have to pay attention to all this too. They're going through the plan of conservation development, and those are important goals and objectives that they're going to be having to adhere to when they go through a review of zoning. Okay, this is a bigger picture, but I'm hearing concern about the way some of these things are written. So I think these boards need to reflect on that to make sure that it's clear what the objectives are here, right? And so I just want to give you purpose that the words here were really a discussion about North Madison, agritourism, you know, and supporting people who have home-based businesses, right? We have a lot of people that work from home now. So that's where you need the infrastructure. You need broadband so people can do their home businesses, you know, that they can work from home. So those are all the things that we were trying to implement into this. So this was not a deep dive onto zoning, and we're not directing what the zoning is going to be. So that's a separate conversation. I will also say that I think that it is important that going forward, any of those types of changes need to be done in a more town meeting type of environment so that the public can have feedback. Planning and zoning is a very highly regulated process, and their meetings aren't conducive to that. And I do think, and I've talked with the chair of planning and zoning, and they're, you know, very open to having those kinds of public dialogue, especially as they complete their plan of conservation development. So the zoning discussion will be a public discussion. And, you know, I'm committed to that, and I think everybody on this board understands that we want to, you know, that we want to address some of these concerns. You know, we've learned from past experience, and we want to make sure that we handle things differently going forward and listen to the public. So I know, Roz, you had your hand, and then we'll go around. I know, I go ahead.
So I'm gonna lose Bill, and I don't want to lose Bill. So Roz Cantwell, 31 Island Avenue, and I served on the Academy Design Committee, previous committee under Bill's leadership. So my reason for being here is because thank you, Jocelyn, I firmly believe in a strong strategic plan, but I hope that somewhere in this, way down in the tactic level, there are tools that align our volunteer committees to this plan. And having been a volunteer on a committee, having come from strong nonprofit leadership, I struggled. And one of the things that we talked about doing when we talked about the Academy School that I think goes to the 2 previous questions is it requires a drawing. We need a map of the town. And I think somewhere between the safe, healthy community and the thriving business and economy, we're experiential in this town. There's so much that is free through our taxes, but this idea of really mapping our town. We had talked many times about mapping just the Route 1 experience because of the need to qualify the community center, but I think to the previous comments, it might be wonderful to just insert in this document a map of the town showing these features. I think many people just aren't aware. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's a comment we have from that, but it's a great idea for sure. Alex, sorry, I know you have your hand up as well.
Sure, Alex Province, 917 Boston Post Road. Just three quick comments. Unintended to follow up with Mr. Katz, right? But I think as we spend time working on this, which has been a slow process, it takes a lot of time. Your point is P&Z can do something really quickly that undermines all of this. So we could like work on this for months and months and months and months. And yet P&Z can make a decision that is much more catastrophic and drastic and has profound reverberations that, happen instantaneously. But my two main points were talking about on the financial, environmental sustainability, historic structures. What happened to across the street from me at the General's residence, I think, and I don't see historic structures mentioned anywhere, but those are something that colonial Connecticut is really important to us and many of us that live in Connecticut, New England, and so I just would like to see preservation of historic structures. And that leads me to my last but brief point. And Cheryl, when hi at Fort Collins, I'm assuming you're there. It seems as though in all of these meetings, there were lots of ideas that were posted, noted, or I don't even know how you can say that. Stickies. Yes, stickies put up against the wall, up on the wall. And some were redundant and kept getting mentioned again and again and again, and some less so. But it would be nice to have all of that data, and I mean this in the kindest way, but to have a more unbiased sort of direction of where all this data was steering us. So I would have loved to have seen all the things that were brought up, how many times they were brought up by different people, and then use that.
I think we actually, Cheryl, you've done that, right? That will be part of this. It'll be available. It's not in this document right now, but we, and I know we did it for the
Thank you.
survey for sure. And then I know she's had a record. Is that like a separate appendix that you would just have it all, because I know you typed it all up, the stickies and.
Right. So to your point, I appreciate that very much because we do document everything. We take photos of everything and then we craft a report with everything. And all of that can be housed on the webpage. You may or may not be aware that Madison has a webpage now dedicated to the strategic plan. And most of those reports, I think, will be housed on that webpage. But I'm happy to, we have a Google Drive full of them and all of the original photos. And all of the original, every single thousands and thousands of comments that came in on the survey, all of that is certainly public record and easily made available.
Send them right to Alex.
I'll do that right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Thank you,
things.
Scott.
So, but I do want to comment on because we talked a lot about preserving our history and our historic structures. And it's funny how somehow it doesn't actually say that here. So I think it's a fair point. So we have this preserve our natural and built assets. And remember, we had to go through and cull and prioritize, but that was always top. And so I'm trying to figure out how that got just in that statement, about our historic. I think it was just woven throughout everything we talked about. So needs to be brought out more, certainly, and highlighted in this. So. Okay, yes.
I had gone to the.
Name and address, sorry.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
Carol Angelino, Stony Lane. And two of the things that people really wanted to preserve were farms and scenic roads. Those two things aren't mentioned in this at all. And you talked about agritourism. You can't have agritourism unless you have a farm. But as Al Katz had mentioned about this PDD, that's had already affected part of the post road
Right.
that has farm on it. And I do think that this PDD should be included in this, because most of the people that I have run into don't know about it or don't understand it.
Thank you, because that's another thing that we talked a lot about, open space and farms and, but I think, you know,
And knowing what's going on in the town.
yeah, and knowing what's going on in the town. So I'm just sitting here going, I think it was caught, like captured,
catch it.
huh?
We did catch it.
Yeah, it was, but I think it's clearly it's not resonating with how it reads and so we need to make sure.
3.3.
Yeah, but we need to bring it out more, so, and, okay. Okay, great, yep,
Hi, Donna DeWaldo, 914 Durham Road. I was on one of the, participated in one of the focus groups, but I've only just read this briefly, and I hope I'm not way out of line, but I'm looking at the
Yeah.
financial and environmental sustainability, particularly financial sustainability. And when you use the word light, I seem to feel that part of it is light. Because you look at the only two things that are mentioned there are aligned budgets to goals, so that doesn't really talk about sustainability, it's more logistics in writing a strategic plan, in my experience of writing a strategic plan. Same thing in mapping line items to strategic goals. That leads me down to the one thing that's attract a wider variety of businesses and business location, which is fine, but even tonight, I think we mentioned other things that might be appropriate in that under goals, like identifying regional resources and also addressing the reality of declining population. I realize some of this might be under the thriving business, and I'm maybe way off base there. That just seems to me needs to be, nothing that's going to be attainable if we don't have financial sustainability. And that doesn't seem to be addressed.
I think that when we talk about aligning budgets, is we're spending our money where people want us to spend the money on, right? That we're doing it in a way that serves the other goals that we've outlined in the strategic plan. And then, you know, we talk about keeping our government fiscally sound as one of the outcomes. But I hear what you're saying, like it's not as
Well, spending it where you want to
specific.
spend is different than having it being sustainable.
Yeah, well, I think ultimately though, that's one of the outcomes. We have these outcomes of fiscally sound town government. But,
It just seems to be light
Yeah.
considering the importance that it
right,
plays in the
right.
whole.
Well, and then we talked about everything, you know, this was hard because it was like, okay, there's a fall under here, there's a fall under here, but really everything we do has to be financially.
Right.
And it was hard to put financial and environmental sustainability into one thing. We talked about they're so different. So, you know, there was some compromises there. But I think what I'm hearing from you, I think there's a better way to talk about financial sustainability a little bit more under these strategic goals.
And I would
objectives.
assume
So
there's
just
a
to
lot of people
clarify what I
interested
said.
in looking for that.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think it's a fair point. So thank you for that. And it maybe, could I, if it's okay, could I go to the online? Because we've heard from a number of people in the room. And what time are we at?
We got 3 minutes. No pressure.
Jacqueline, is there anybody with their hands raised?
No hands raised, but there are 5 questions. Okay, I'll read this one. A few photos in the report do not show a diverse community. To me, it projects the continuation of a culturally static population. Here's another question. Did the process give you any thoughts about how the board and committee structure might address the strategy? Address the strategy.
I think Jacqueline, the concept there was what might we change about the board and committee structure to make sure that somebody mentioned it in the audience that they're part of the strategic plan. And, you know, that conversation we had about how many boards we have and the restructuring of those boards and committees to be more effective and efficient under high performing government.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we are trying to do too is streamline a little bit. We have a lot of committees in town, which is great, but some of them overlap, you know, and I think trying to make them a little bit more streamlined. We're going to be over the next 6 to 12 months looking at some of those. We have to reordinance all our boards and commissions in your call this new town charter. So it's made us think through what are those charges and how do we structure them differently. So maybe we may consolidate 2, but make them slightly bigger. So that's also going to be something that's happening this next 6 to 12 months with the boards and commissions. Okay, and then.
All right, there's one more question on here. You want me to get to it?
Sure.
Okay, the last question is, in the big picture, preserving our small town feel can be at odds with some of the other objectives listed in the plan. Is it your intention to be more specific about parameters around the economic development and tourism goals, both of which can work against the maintenance of a small town feel?
Well put. I think that's gonna be the needle that we're gonna have to thread there, is trying to find that balance, and that is a challenge. But I think that, you know, what we're hearing today, earlier too, about zoning and all this stuff, that's the conversation the town has to have. Like, what do we as a community want? We want to preserve some certain things, but we want these other amenities. We want, you know, our tax base to be more diverse, you know, so we're gonna have to balance all that. It's not, there's no easy answer, but it's something that we need to weigh into now and make those decisions, I think, over the next 12 months. So there will be action items.
Perfect answer.
And there's no perfect answer, right? So I know there's a few more in the room, if we could take those for a minute, and then I think there will be another one of these, probably next month. I think we'll talk about it at our board meeting. This is great feedback. I'm grateful for you guys coming out, so it's very helpful.
I know Terry's
you had-
been patient.
Oh, yeah, Terry, Terry, please, yep.
I've got a couple of questions, so I'll try to make it short. On page 15, the financial environmental sustainability, which others have touched on already, it seems like, for example, creating more housing would be in direct conflict with preserving open space, for example. And to attract a balanced tax base, I think we already have a tax base that is predominantly anchored by residential taxes versus business income. And so why would that be all the way at the bottom? A balanced tax base should be probably up at number 1 or 2, and preserving our natural assets should be number 1 or 2 as well. Rather than adding more housing, if we are losing population, which I don't know, I hadn't heard that before, but that's interesting. And then another item on that same page is safe and accessible waterfront. I'm curious about, I know that Seaview Beach is experiencing a lot of erosion. That's all private beach. We, the public, don't have access to it. So will town funds, i.e. taxpayers' dollars, go into preserving a beach that the public does not have access to? Then on page 19, thriving business and economy. Number 4 is thriving tourism industry. And just above that, establish a policy for public and private partnerships. Looking at both of those, I see a really great opportunity in Academy. I'm one that voted for Academy to be saved from development of very high, expensive condominiums. But I saw it as an opportunity, as a public-private partnership. And it's a large building, has incredible strong bones. And, you know, there are people out there that had ideas such as a mini, not Faneuil Hall, Quincy Market, for example. But I know, that a lot of it has already been kind of planned out for taking departments that are located here and also in the building next door, such as Madison Youth and Family Services and Beach and Rec, and that will take up a third or more of that building. For it to be community center.
That's been voted on by the public, so.
Well, what was voted on by the public, it was put in as a community center so that people could keep it from
I'm just saying,
development and.
I understand you have
Yeah.
your views on Academy, I mean, that's, and I understand that, I think that's been decided upon, that there's been a plan that was presented to the
That
public.
was to
It voted
preserve the
on,
building from
and
being turned
it was very
into
clear what the
expensive
use of the
condominiums.
building was going to be when it was voted on by the public, so.
My point on that, if I can express it, is that a public-private partnership and attracting tourism, it's right there. It's in that building.
Fair enough.
And it's screaming for it, and people want it. If you look on social media, it was comment after comment after comment. It was not about moving government into that building. That's something that was done by
So board, I think that by the public, it was voted on with a very clear plan of how the building was
The
gonna be
public
used.
did
So-
not vote to put
Yes, they-
Madison Youth and Family
Yes, they
Services in
did.
there.
It was all part of the
It
same
was
plan.
all part of the
It
plan,
was
it was
that
in the, so, but we're here, we're not here to litigate that issue, we're here just to talk more broadly, and those are some of the goals that, you know, came out of the discussion of the public. So,
Yeah.
so any other public comment, because we probably should wrap it up, and then there'll be more opportunities.
Hi, Frank Angelino, 42 Stony Lane. In reading the report, I get a different flavor than what I heard from you tonight, particularly about commercial development in the town. What you said tonight resonates in that, as Harry Truman says, you should mean what you say and say what you mean. I don't think the tribute report says what you articulated tonight about commercial development. Yes, it makes sense. East and West, Boston Post Road, North Madison are opportunities. And yes, we're going through a change now with so many people working from their homes. That statement should somehow get into the report because it's an important refinement about commercial development. And I think it would set people's minds at ease that this isn't just a way to look and develop commercially right in the center of a residential district and then deal with the problems later. So I think that should be expressed in the report. And as
Yeah.
Cheryl said earlier, this is a projection of what the town is going to look like in 50 years. Well, it so happens we came here 50 years ago. So I have a strong sense of what the town looked like 50 years ago. And I think it's changed organically and beneficially over those 50 years. I can still visualize it. It's different, but it's better in many ways. So that what we want to do is keep that direction of making it better. I don't know have all the answers, but there are ways to do that by being vigilant. And we must do that now as we go forward, because the next 50 years, we're facing just as much change as we had in the last 50 years. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think, given the time, and we have a whole meeting still ahead of us, you know, you're also welcome to continue to submit any comments, email them to my email if you'd like, and I'll share them with the board, or just for BOS@madisonct.org. And there will be an opportunity again. We'll come out, we'll kind of take another crack at it. We're going to talk about the process at our meeting shortly hereafter. You're welcome to listen to that, along with a lot of other stuff. But this is very good feedback, because it's kind of like we're flying blind a little bit. Well, sometimes we do this and then we get in our little, focus areas, and we go into these meetings and you start realizing, what happened to that? That kind of got dropped off the table, or we forgot about that. So I think this is really helpful feedback, and I encourage you to email us with more, and we'll be working on this, because we want everybody, not everybody's gonna be 100% happy with it, but we also want people to feel good about it, and make sure that we're not creating any lightning rods out there, because that's not the intention of this. This is something that we should all be able to support. So thank you with that. Any other comments from the board? Cheryl? Yeah.
Oh, well, not so much for Cheryl, but for all you guys. I just want to thank you for all coming tonight. Our folks that have participated online, thank you for coming. This is such an important document for the town and for us to utilize as board members. And, as we've been more intimately involved in the process, it is one of those things where I think our head gets in there and we know what we're thinking, or we know what this says, but perception is reality. And the way the public is reading it, we want it to be perceived the proper way. So all the feedback that we received tonight, this was ideal for us so that we can put the right wording in the document to make sure that the public, when they're reading it, that they're receiving it the way, say what you say what you mean kind of deal, that there's no misconceptions about what's going on. So this was really great feedback tonight.
At the end of the day, this is not the Board of Selectmen's document. This is the town of Madison's document. That is super, super important. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think 2-second break and then we'll go into our.